Good morning and welcome to this live reaction to Newcastle United's 1-1 draw with Manchester City at St James's Park yesterday. Just wait for a few people to join before we get going. But it was a very, very good performance, I thought, for Newcastle yesterday. The best performance of the season. Not that it was a high bar for that necessarily, but I felt like Newcastle did what I thought they were going to do. If you look back at my preview on, I think it was Thursday, I was quite confident that Newcastle would play well because I think the game suited them in a way that other games haven't. They're not particularly good on the ball in possession at the moment, and it was good to have a team come to St James's Park and look to dominate the ball and look to dictate the play and allow Newcastle, or take the risk of allowing Newcastle to turn them over in midfield and hit them on the counter-attack, which happened quite a lot, and it allowed Newcastle to press higher, allowed Newcastle to bring intensity back into their game as well. And yeah, it was a really, really good performance. If you are in the chat, please do, first of all, like the stream, but also then send a comment into the chat as well, and we'll get going. But I think, yeah, for me, it was the best performance of the season. It's been a little bit of a relief, I think, to show that Newcastle remember how to play this way, remember how to give teams a difficult game. And as I say, once more people get into the chat, we can and into the stream, we can talk a little bit more in detail. But please, yeah, if there's a couple of people in already, please do drop some comments into the live, and we can get going. But yeah, up to seventh now, I believe. Carl says, "Morning, nice to reflect on a solid performance." Exactly. I think, yeah, Carl, I completely agree. It was getting a bit worrying, wasn't it? With all the sort of like the results were, at Wolves and I think Southampton was a little bit. There was a mitigating circumstance going down to 10 men after 25 minutes, but to come here and talk about Newcastle in a positive light is a really good thing. So I'm glad to be sitting here and having a little bit of a spring in my step when I do it, or spring in my seat, if you like. Yeah. Up to seventh, I think now. They went sixth, but went down to seventh after Fulham beat Nottingham Forest. Sorry, I couldn't react to this game immediately after the full-time whistle as I would have liked to. I'll do that on Tuesday. I'm working again on for BBC Sports. So I'm not at the game. I think I can react straight after it though to Wimbledon, but unfortunately I couldn't do that yesterday. I was working for the BBC on their Football League output, so I wasn't at the game, but watched it before I started and was mightily impressed with everything. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, but we'll get going and start to look into it. I think we'll start with the first 11. I think it was 3 changes made from the Fulham game. No Isak, which wasn't surprising. I think I went early with my preview video on Isak not playing at Fulham when obviously he didn't play against City. He won't play against Wimbledon, and he doesn't look like he'll be fit for Everton as well because of a broken toe. Quite surprised, to be honest, that they tried to do that again with the, I thought when James Bunce came in, sort of painkilling injections and trying to get through games and playing players who aren't fully fit. I know Alexander Isak it shows his importance to the team, but I thought that was a thing of the past. That's why I made the video fairly confident in, not that I had any information, but fairly confident that I thought that he wouldn't play in the game just because James Bunce came in to sort injury issues and obviously it aggravated it, and he came out of this game in a more important game in that sense, missing City, or a more difficult game on paper, obviously, and it. So I was disappointed to see the fact that Isak was missing the game, And I was worried about Gordon. As I say in my preview video for the Fulham game, I spent the whole 10 minutes talking about why I thought Osula should start, because I don't like Gordon playing down the middle. It doesn't give Newcastle an output. He has been poor all game. But him starting up front actually helped him, I think. He really made it, led the press. He was more involved in the game. He was playing centrally. He didn't have to wait to be unlocked, if you like. And yeah, I thought it was a really, really impressive performance from Gordon. It was a good decision to start him up front. I'll freely admit that, my opinion to start Osula at home to Man City is not the same. I have this. It's not to say that I was advocating that as a way at Fulham. I think he'll obviously start against Wimbledon, but Gordon playing down the middle was a positive thing. But the biggest news of the day for me was Sandro Tonali starting in midfield. Finally, I was really, really pleased to see that happen. If you are in the chat, by the way, there's a few more people joining. Please do like the stream, because it helps boost it for other people to join. But also then subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also drop some comments in, and we'll get going. But yeah, as I say, Sandro Tonali, massive performance. I thought he was my man of the match. There was a bit of a debate and conversation in the in my family group chat yesterday, deciding whether Gordon or Gordon or Tonali was man of the match. For me, it was Tonali. I thought he was okay, and he was very good out of possession in the first half, and very good at knitting the team together and keeping it compact, and sort of helping with the press and managing the space that Man City had. They had a lot of space in the midfield behind the play, but they never had any space in behind the defense for Haaland to attack. It was really, really clever. And I think that stemmed from Tonali. Then in the second half, he was really good at finding quick forward passes like we know he can. It was for me, it was his best performance, possibly since Villa, in terms of how effective he was. As I say, I was a lot more defensive of Tonali before, at the start of last season, before his ban kicked in, because I thought he was settling in next to Bruno, and I thought yesterday Bruno, Joelinton, and Tonali worked really, really well together. You saw I think my video on Monday, I won't go into too much detail on this, but my video on Monday is going to be looking at the Joelinton conundrum, because I think he's brilliant at breaking up the play and at transitioning, and the power that he has to run forward. But in possession, he struggles, and that's why he struggled for much of this season. He was much better yesterday as a result of not having to dominate the ball, not having to play with the game in front of him, if you like. And I think that really, really helped him. And then obviously, so you had that midfield that worked really well. Dan Burn was phenomenal as well in defence. Lots of Man City fans, saw a Man City fan say that, Haaland had destroyed William Saliba against Arsenal the week before. What was he going to do to Dan Burn? And Dan Burn, as he so often does, proves himself against higher opposition, and proves himself to be much more competent and capable than people think he is. And I would put a lot of Newcastle fans into that thing as well. I think he had a difficult time last season because of a mitigating of a lot of circumstances that made it untenable for him to play at left back at the time. But now he's back at centre back. I think he's been one of Newcastle's best players this season, stemming from the Southampton game when him and Kraft were fantastic at centre half. And he's not really looked back. I think he was probably slightly at fault for the goal, you could argue. But it didn't really feel like something that Newcastle that was going to impact his performance. The perception of his overall performance. I thought he was brilliant, as I say, marshalling Haaland to make sure that the lack of recovery pace was not an issue. There was no space for Haaland to run in behind. All the space. You watched Match of the Day last night. They actually, Micah Richards actually highlighted it. All of the space was in front of. It was behind the midfield when Newcastle had the ball high, and it was in front, but it was always at every stage in front of the defence. And I think that was why it was so crucial. That's why Haaland I mean, he still had a couple of chances. Still, obviously, missed that header with that Grealish cross, which is probably harder than it looks. But you know, you would expect a player like of Erling Haaland's quality to probably put that in. But he didn't have much of an impact on the game, and Newcastle used the absence of Rodri to good effect. City were slow and laborious in the game as it went on. I think Pep Guardiola would say that, and they made mistakes, I think he said. That stems from not having Rodri in the team. So Newcastle made tactical changes, ideal tactical changes. I think Eddie Howe deserves a lot of credit, having had a lot of stick in the last few weeks. There's a couple more comments in from Dexter. Says Hall had his best game. He did absolutely have his best game. I thought Hall was really, really good. Wonder if we have a bit of an ASM issue when Gordon plays there at centre back. Burn is great, definitely the best position. Yeah, I completely agree with obviously the Burn thing, because he has, that is his position, and it's sort of funny how I think Eddie Howe spent pretty much the entirety of Eddie Howe spent pretty much the entirety of having Dan Burn and his team desperate to try and find a place for him. But that place has not been at centre back because he's had Botman and Cher, who really sort of help progress the team in a way that Burn doesn't necessarily. But the fact that he's had to play at centre back shows, it gets him back to his basics. And I think that's really why he's been so good this season. Hall, can you elaborate on what you mean by an ASM issue? Do you mean in terms of the tracking back and the doubling up when you say Gordon plays on the left, Dexter? But I agree with Hall, the Hall assessment. Absolutely, absolutely brilliant. In a way that lots of people probably thought wouldn't happen. Obviously, Lloyd Kelly didn't do himself too many favours at Fulham. Struggled really badly, I think, against, was it Traore? So the idea that he was gonna be better at one-on-one marking against would have been Bernardo Silva yesterday. But Hall, there was a couple of chances. Obviously, he's still not perfect defensively, is he? But a brilliant performance from him yesterday. I think, I agree. Carl says there's some outstanding contributions from Hall, Birdseye, and Gordon. Yeah, for me. So I'd love to know what you guys think in the chat. Who you thought the man of the match was? For me, it was Tonali, as I say. I think, apart from the sort of weird Grealish. So Dexter's just come in. Sorry, I said tracking back. Say Gordon is lazy. It's not his strength. Yeah, I don't think he does so well going backwards, but what he does really well, I think, that even the ASM never really did, was he presses really well forwards. He presses really well from the front. That's why it worked a little bit better in this game for him to play down the middle, because he could start the press, and then you had Tonali and you had Joelinton following in, and then it allowed Hall and Trippier to push up as well. It was the Newcastle did really, really well because, and it stemmed from Gordon playing in the central position, in my opinion, with the press across the pitch. I know what you mean about Gordon going backwards. It's not a laziness thing. It's just that Gordon's always impacted the game better, as I say, when he's looking forwards, when the game's in front of him. So I agree with that. Sanjeev says, "Hello Harry, what's your view on our penalty? Was it a dive or a valid penalty?" So, again, this is another question I'll open up to the floor. For me, I agreed with so I watched Match of the Day last night, and I think I can understand why Man City fans think it's a dive, because there was very little contact and everything. But I think in that position, I mean, Gordon's running at quite a pace, and any touch is gonna topple him effectively. And I think that why would he dive? I think if the alternative is he just goes around the keeper and puts it in the net, I don't think he's diving. So I think it probably was a penalty. I can understand why Man City fans think it wasn't. I actually think that the more surefire penalty was the Gordon the Joe Linton one on with Kyle Walker a few minutes later, and I do wonder if the fact that Jared Gillett had already given one meant that he didn't give the other, but I don't know. Let me know if what you guys think on that. If you agree with what I think, and what do you think, Sanjeev? What's your thought as well? I agree, as I say, that it was debatable, and as I say, if it was the other way around, maybe we're sitting here and with a slightly different attitude to it. But to me, I understand the sort of idea that strikers running at that pace are unlikely to stay on their feet in that situation. It's if you watch a match today, Gary Lineker says it's not the same as diving to go down. Like, the striker isn't obligated to jump over the goalkeeper. Like, the goalkeeper is in the way. What I do agree with is that it was only a yellow card and not a red. I never liked the idea that that a goalkeeper would be sent off for that. I think Dex is right. You'd be fuming if it wasn't given. That's the thing. Like Carl said, it wasn't a Jota, and I think that absolutely the difference. Like Jota was going down before the contact was made. And I agree. Yeah, I as Dexter said, I agree with Lineker. It's a really, really good point, and I think I'm not a huge fan of a lot of punditry these days. I think a lot of it is unnecessary, but that's a really good point that I think that a striker would have to make, and I'm quite surprised that Alan Shearer doesn't actually believe it's a penalty. But I really actually think that Gary Lineker deserves a lot of credit for making that point, because you'd have to be a striker who's been in that situation to understand the difference. Because to a football fan or to a journalist, to somebody who hasn't played the game, we can sit here and tell, oh, there wasn't much contact, it wasn't this, it wasn't that. But in the context of going through, to not be obligated, as Lineker says, he's not obligated to go against the goalkeeper, to go around the goalkeeper or over the goalkeeper. Sorry. So what else is he going to do? And I don't think he waited for the contact so much. I just think he probably took advantage of the contact, which is generally what. But in the context of what it was, it doesn't mean it isn't a penalty. Sanjeev says AG was looking for the penalty. Isaac would have lifted the ball over the keeper. I think there was probably a point where he could have shot, and then as I say, I don't think it's Jota, as Carl said. I don't think it's where Jota was going down hoping for the contact. The contact sort of came and he made the most of it. I think there's lots of people and lots of penalties that have been given that where people have used contact to go down and make it, obviously, and Gordon is running at quite a pace. So I'm not sure I quite agree with that, in my opinion. If the keeper comes out like that and doesn't get the ball, he knows it's a penalty. That's a really exactly. I think that's a really good point as well. What did you think of the other one that a few moments later? Did you think that one was a penalty? Walker and Joe Linton. Because at the time, as I say, I was watching it on TNT Sports, so Ali McCoist said it wasn't. I thought if that was I thought it probably was, and my opinions actually got bigger in terms of thinking it was since. I don't know what you think, but to me, I thought it was, and I wonder if Jared Gillett wasn't particularly happy about having just given one that, at the very least, you could admit that there's a debatable element of the Gordon one. That we can say that. Dexter says Joe Linton is always falling over, which probably goes against him. Yeah, possibly, but I think it's brave of Walker to make that challenge in the area. Surely. Any other as well? What other thoughts did you have? I mean, we've spoken about. I want to give a shout out as well while you guys are coming back with some thoughts on the penalty. I want to give out a shot to Kieran Trippier as well, because there's been a lot of talk about Trippier, and I think a really good point was made when I was on the True Faith reaction pod to the Fulham game by Adam Cleary of 442 fame. If you're not familiar with him, get familiar with him. He's very, very good at what he does on 442's YouTube channel. And he said that, there's lots of things you can do as a footballer to, that will effectively make your reputation solid in terms of like you are this now, you're pigeonholed. And Trippier was pigeonholed last season as he's past it now. It's time for Livramento. It's time to to see about sort of phasing Trippier out in that sense. And I think I subscribe to that. If you look back at my summer videos, I was talking about not in terms of getting rid of Trippier, but certainly looking at swapping the roles and making Livramento the first choice. But in the last few weeks, Trippier has been really, really good defensively. He made a couple of like that block that he made at the back post to deny, I think it was Haaland in the first half, was brilliant. I think generally he's been for me probably Newcastle's most consistent player since the takeover happened, in terms of what he's brought. Possibly because of injuries, you could argue. Obviously, Isak scores every time he plays, but he doesn't play. He hasn't played every game because of injuries, and Bruno has had some games where I love Bruno to bits, but he's had some games where I think I alluded to this last week, where teams have targeted him, and there have been difficult games for Trippier where he's been through poor, fatigue and poor form. But generally speaking, like he's set the tone as generally speaking, as I think Dexter's just said, he's the catalyst for the style of play. Like the way that he is the catalyst for the style of play, because he's the reason effectively Burn went at left back in the season that Newcastle finished fourth. And it worked really well because Burn was able to go into the back three with Schär and Botman and make a really, really tall back three while Trippier went up and attacked. And that's why even last season he still got 10 assists. So he's still been really good in an attacking sense. But I think defensively he was brilliant yesterday. As I say, that challenge, he missed the tackle on Grealish, which can happen. I think we need to be careful to analyze everything. Yes, against City, it's more pertinent because if you make one mistake, they can punish it, and it was one. But I don't think missing a tackle is necessarily a mistake. It can happen, as I say. Grealish just beat him, and then Burn is as more likely at fault for that goal anyway. But I thought, I just wanted to give Trippier a bit of a shout out. Look at his leadership yesterday, pulling players back and always talking. Yeah, the thing about also, like, I want to also make the point, like, as great as like that Almiron purple patch was 2 seasons ago, it came from him working with Trippier and Trippier being behind him and constantly talking to him. And I've spoken to Kieran Trippier a few times in mixed zones and like pre the Carabao Cup final. We did a media day at St James's Park. Sorry, no, at the training ground. And we spoke to him, and we spoke to Longstaff, we spoke to Burn, and we spoke to Eddie Howe. And he was it really gave me this feeling that he was needed to make this team go to the next level, because everybody, like, as much as great as that day was, and as amazing as it was to talk about Trippier, to talk about the cup final and how long it had been since Newcastle were last in the cup final and the opportunity to win a first trophy, there was a lot of sort of like enjoying the occasion, whereas he was there as somebody who's been there and done it, and he was sort of saying, no, we need to focus on the game. And to be fair, others were saying that, but you knew that he had been there and he wasn't fazed by this build-up. And I think he was the standard bearer from the moment he came in. And in the last few months, we've kind of forgotten that, and we've kind of forgotten his importance. And actually, what's become of this is so much better. In the last few weeks, he's recaptured some of his form. I think He's never going to have the pace that he had. I think in terms of physicality, he's maybe deteriorated over the last couple of years. He's nearly 34. That can happen. But the leadership has been pointed out in the chat, and the rhythm and the quality that he sets in the team, is definitely worth commending. Agent Ancelotti, I'm assuming, is an Everton fan because he's just said enjoy because you're going to get mauled at Goodison Park. I think it would be very. I think a lot of Newcastle fans will not be particularly confident even after this performance about going to Goodison Park because Newcastle at home and Newcastle away have been a very, very different animal over the last couple of years, and they've had issues at Goodison Park in the recent couple of years. Aside from obviously the 4-1 win there in the season they finished fourth. Obviously, losing 3-0 last season was a start of a really poor run. And that late defeat the season before when Alex Iwobi scored. So bad memories in recent times under Sean Dyche of Everton. But I think Newcastle need to go there with a little bit of confidence, but they also need to show something different that they've shown away from home this season. But we'll get on to talking about Everton in next week's preview, and then obviously look back at the game next week as well. Dexter says, totally agree. If you look at the team's downturn in form and Trippier's own form, almost identical. Yeah, that's the thing. And I think what was funny was I think there's a lot of change of perception about Newcastle and the team and the direction of travel and how, in recent times, I said this on the podcast the other day on True Faith, saying that Newcastle are no longer, generally this season, had no longer been any good from corners, no threat from corners. There'd not been any intensity in their play. There'd not been any. They're not good from at winning the ball in midfield. Then that everything that they became, they're not good at stopping shots. They're everything they became good at 2 seasons ago, they've stopped being good at, and I think there's been a lot of change in perception. And I would say that the perception change is very similar in terms of Trippier as well. Like lots of people just assumed that he was brilliant and would continue to be brilliant, and then as soon as it stopped, and the confidence has just seeped away from the fans into him. And I think, as I say, in the last few weeks and months, it's become. And as I said, I'm not absolving myself of this. I've certainly said, if you look back at my videos, that Livramento would be the first choice, and eventually Livramento will take over from Kieran Trippier. That's absolutely that's certain eventually. But lots of people were probably a bit too quick in their assessment of that, and I think lots of people have been too quick to write him off. And I agree with what Dexter says. Trippier and Newcastle, when they've been poor, it's been together, and that isn't a coincidence. I think because he's a standard bearer, because he's so good at what he does, when he doesn't do it to the best of his ability, it can impact things, can't it? If you're in the chat and you haven't already, please do like the stream and keep chatting away, and subscribe if you haven't already, as well. Let's keep going. Let's keep chatting about the game. Anything else? Nick Pope made a couple of good saves. Again, still, I don't think anyone's ever going to get to the point with Nick Pope where he's ever gonna be fully appreciated, because I think he splits opinion. Like, some people think that he's not good enough with his feet and therefore needs to be replaced. Some people think that forget what he does with his feet. He makes so many great saves, and that save from Bernardo Silva at the end, another example of what he brings. And he's been phenomenal over the last couple of years for Newcastle, and he was again phenomenal. And as much as we're talking about Trippier, I think we need to learn from that with Nick Pope, and need to appreciate what he brings, because we saw last season what Newcastle were like without him, and a lot of that was because not just because Dubravka is not of the same level, but it's also not of the right style of goalkeeper. For all the stuff that Nick Pope gets about not being able to kick very well, he is very good at coming off his line and helping push Newcastle up the pitch. And that was not so much the shining thing of yesterday, but it was subtle. The big thing was his shot stopping ability, and he's still very good at that, despite obviously the despite the mistake they made at Fulham. Dexter says, "I've always thought Trips could be a threat." I think that could be as a defensive midfielder. I think that could be a really good point going forward, because he's so good on the ball, isn't he? He's so good at his distribution in terms of finding players long balls. You can see him dictating the play, and I think to me he's the kind of ideal player. Like that's quite a common thing now, that fullbacks go into midfield. Philip Lahm started it years ago. David Alaba. It's a Pep Guardiola thing, isn't it? And I think that Kieran Trippier, as he gets older, that can be the way he moves and goes into play in that position. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. Thanks for your support, Dexter. Really appreciate it. I really appreciate the comments, and yeah, if you haven't already, people, please do subscribe to the channel. There's more of this, and also while you're here, if you have any thoughts on what you'd like to see from the channel, anything different, then feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll consider them going forward. But Newcastle, let's I ask this after every game. Does this game change your viewpoint and your outlook on the entire season generally? How do you look at this season now? Do you have a little bit more belief now? Newcastle have shown that they can still play more intensity, pressing high and looking more energetic, or do you worry about the team going forward and saying why haven't they been doing this before? I think what does this change your outlook? As I say, does this change your outlook of the season as a whole? For me, I think it's there's still the jury's still out, because as Agent Ancelotti perfectly stuck it in the chat, we're going to get mauled at Goodison Park. That's still not I'm not worried about getting beaten heavily or anything like that, but I do worry that Newcastle, because they've shown that they're passive away from home. They've shown that they can't dominate and find their levels as consistently away from home. Everton obviously won yesterday. Correct if I'm wrong. I think they did. I think obviously yes, they beat Crystal Palace yesterday. That could be a something that ignites their season, and they'll relish playing Newcastle. It'll be under the lights as well as I can't remember the last Newcastle game at Goodison Park that wasn't under the darkness. And I think Everton will be up for that, and Newcastle got to be careful. But they showed character and showed a lot of the skills and a lot of the quality that they still have, and I think they needed to prove that, because lots of questions were rightfully being asked of them in the last few weeks, especially from people like me on things like this stream. I've not been particularly happy with what I've seen, and as I said, up until yesterday, it was rather inexplicable as to why it was like that. Like I couldn't understand. There's talking last season, it was all about the fatigue and it was all about the number of games and all this. None of that was the case in this one, really. And I think that there's got to be a question as to can they carry this on. The big question remains, why are we so Jekyll and Hyde, exactly, from Carl, when it comes to our performances home and away. Again, as I say, it's rather inexplicable, isn't it? Like they were. I think it was always the case. It's always been the case. It will always be the case naturally because of the way Newcastle play. They will always be better at home than away from home, and that's always been the way it has been for Newcastle. Going back to the Sir Bobby Robson years. If you haven't already, please check out my Black and White Night, in which I speak to lots of people from that era who give the inside track on how he how he took Newcastle from a relegation team to the Champions League, but the away thing, the away from home, they weren't great. Like in the season that they finished 5th, for example, in Bobby's last full season, they won twice on the road, and they still finished 5th, and they won twice on the road, and they won both games back to back in October against Middlesbrough and Fulham, and they weren't. As I say, there was still some massive. Like, I remember losing 5-2 at Blackburn in 2002 in the year they finished 4th or 3rd in October. There was some horror shows in the year that they finished 5th under Alan Pardew in 2012. Lost 5, conceded 5. Fulham conceded 5 at Spurs, conceded 4 at Wigan, conceded quite a few. They lost quite a few games in spectacular fashion that season away from home, but they were so good at home. Generally, I think they didn't lose many games at St James's, and that's always what my point. It's a long-winded way of saying it, but my point is that Newcastle have always been better at home. That's always been the case under Eddie Howe as well. Like even in the year that they finished 4th, they were better at home than they were on the road generally. Even though they by the end in that sort of, what got them 4th was that run in the spring where they were just beating every team quite comfortably. They scored 5 at West Ham, 4 at Everton, as I said. They beat Brentford away from home as well. They did really well at the back end of that season, but generally speaking, at the start of it, their home form was what was sustaining them. So this isn't a new issue, but it is something that needs to change, I think. Dexter says the style of play isn't sustainable long term. We might step up for big games, but even yesterday we had 4 players cramp up after a week's rest. Our squad is too old for the intensity of play. I think this has been recognised, and as I said this before on a previous live. Thanks to a few more people are in. Please continue to like the stream and get involved in the chat. We'll be here for another 20-25 minutes. Usually try and keep these streams for an hour generally. Style of play isn't sustainable, says Dexter. I think this has been recognised. Like it obviously wasn't possible last season because of the number of games and the number of games and the fatigue and the fact that they couldn't get up to train. They couldn't really do any proper training. Like it was, Eddie Howe said this. It was recovery and then preparation. There wasn't any time to sit on the training ground. And actually, Anthony Gordon noted this in the pre-match on TNT. Said that the game getting postponed or changed against Wimbledon was a real benefit because it meant that they could sit and actually train. And they could use the Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday to actually get into the tactical things and the real the detail and get conditioned to do what they did to City in a better way. But generally, I think that's been recognised, Dexter, that Newcastle can't do that long term. Maybe it's the squad needs a bit of a refresh in that sense, yes. But you saw it with Liverpool, like somebody said about Arne Slot against Jurgen Klopp. The lack of injuries that Liverpool have had this season, the fact that they found a way to press high and be intense, but also dominate the ball. I think that's what Newcastle's evolution is trying to be. They're not quite there yet. They've shown that in recent games. Tonali coming back is an absolute massive plus in that sense, because as I said in previous. I know you. Yes, you do, Carl. Carl's got a signed copy. If you do want a copy of a book, give me a shout, and I will sort you out with that. I think that's what Newcastle are trying to do. What Liverpool have done. That's what they mod. Like if you look at the Newcastle 2 seasons ago when they were at their sort of intense best, it reminded me so much of early or sort of peak Jurgen Klopp Liverpool in terms of the way they played. Nobody could live with them, particularly at St James's. Liverpool, there was a point where Liverpool struggled, and it was because of injuries, and that's because of the sustainability of that intense play isn't great. Like it fell off a cliff for Jurgen Klopp at Dortmund as well, if you remember. So they've Liverpool have recognised that and sort of transitioned into a sort of more possession-based team who can still press and can still, push high and can still be a nightmare for teams to deal with, but in a slightly different way. And they can coast through games a little bit more, which is what Newcastle have been all or nothing under Eddie Howe. They're either brilliant or they're not. And I think that they're trying to get a bit of a middle ground and be better on the ball and be better at controlling games. My issue is this season they haven't got anywhere near that so far. There's not been a point where they, up until yesterday, where they looked like they could do anything in terms of keeping the ball, in terms of recycling possession, in terms of pressing it forward. Their strongest, they look good at, like, in parts against Southampton, in parts against Bournemouth in the second half, in parts in the first half against Wolves, but it wasn't sustainable. I think that is a huge reason why Tonali is so important, as I've said in the past. But generally speaking, I agree with what Dex has said. Very long-winded answer to that, but I agree that ultimately the intensity is our identity is probably not going to be the way that they play anymore. Generally, but they need to get better at recycling the ball. If you look at why Liverpool are so good under Arne Slot, it's because he's so good at because he's used that team and changed the sort of, just tweak the way that they play to make them better better in possession. Sai says, Howe's too stubborn to adapt to another style. I think he's trying to adapt to this style. I think he said that, but I think he's also I agree. I think the stubbornness has been a fair criticism in the past. Can you say it this season because he's made so many changes? I think you could almost say it's the opposite issue now. He's not. He's trying. This season it feels like he's tried to do too much and it's not worked up until yesterday. As I say, based off the back of this Man City game, I've got nothing but credit for Eddie Howe yesterday. I think he got his tactics right. I think he got his team selection right in the circumstances. Obviously, there were, as great as Gordon was, I do want to point out in the first half, like, Gordon is no answer to Isak. Like, that's why they've brought in Asula. That's why they're trying to trade him up, and that's why they hope to have Wilson, Asula, and Isak fit at the same time. But there were times in that first half, particularly where Newcastle didn't have a goal threat because they didn't have that focal point, which is exactly the point I was trying to make last week about why I would have started Asula at Fulham. A couple more comments. Dexter says, when Howe tried to change the Bournemouth style of play, got relegated. Love that you also see how pivotal Tonali is to us changing. He's such an intelligent player. I think Tonali is going to be every bit as important when he gets going at Newcastle as Bruno and Isak. And I think those two players sit in a level above everybody else. Even Gordon, Joe Linton, whoever you want to throw, everyone else is below those two in terms of style, in terms of quality, and in terms of the way that they impact the team. And I think that Tonali is going to be every bit as important as those two once he gets going, because he isn't the same. Like he does similar. He can do a similar job to Bruno. I think he's kind of like stylistically, and this is a very simplistic thing, and I'm not. It's not a comparison in terms of quality. I think stylistically he's a hybrid between Bruno and Longstaff, and I think that's what the team needs, because you've got a player who can play the ball forward, flying the passes, really intelligent as on the ball, just as Bruno is, which is where Longstaff lacks. But he has that ability to get back into the position. He's got the reading of the game. He makes the sacrificial runs. He makes those passes. He makes those challenges that Bruno doesn't. And I think that's where Tonali is going to be so crucial. And a lot of people questioned Eddie Howe and Newcastle for why they wanted Tonali at a point where maybe there were bigger issues elsewhere, and why they didn't go for a straight number 6. And I think actually Tonali's proving why, because Newcastle have a midfield with him in it that doesn't look like it can be overrun, doesn't look like it can be got through, but also looks like it can progress. And I think that's the brilliance of Tonali as a footballer. And I think that as a midfield, once it finds its feet, and I think there is, as I say, I don't want to touch too much on Joe Linton in this game, in this stream, because I want to talk more about him in Monday's analysis. But and because I do have misgivings in a way, but if that, in terms of balance, in terms of power, poise, and solidity, Tonali, Bruno, and Joe Linton does look and feel like it can be the future for Newcastle, because Tonali's so good at what he does, and next to Bruno, who's obviously brilliant at what he does as well. But I think there's actually lots of people questioned about Tonali and Bruno, as are they able and are they primed to play together? Are they going to struggle? Is it going to be a Gerard Lampard type thing? It's not, because Tonali has a skill set that Bruno doesn't have, and Bruno probably has a bit of a skill set that Tonali doesn't quite have as well. Carl says the team generally has run out of steam despite less games than last year. Fitness is a concern. Yesterday was the exception. This is the thing. Like, generally speaking, Newcastle need to make sure that this doesn't become the exception. But at this sitting now, we've had one good performance to look back on, and 4 or 5 really iffy ones, particularly in a fitness thing. Why is the team not as intense? What's gone wrong? Because the fitness thing was like the issue. And this isn't for me in terms of fitness as in like staying not being injured. It's a fitness thing in terms of being able to go through the entire game. Why wasn't it a problem 2 years ago? And this is what I mean about the fact that the team isn't the same team anymore, and the fact that these things are inexplicable. What is it about you? I know that the players are slightly 2 years older. Burns now 32 or 31. Trippier's nearly 34. I get that, and in that sense, there hasn't been enough because of PSR issues. They haven't been able to be as quick in terms of regenerating the team in that sense. But also, at the same time, like, that was why they bought younger players. Like Gordon, as has been pointed out, Gordon hasn't looked like that player for a long time. Why not? Isak has looked isolated. There wasn't a point when he was playing 2 seasons ago when he looked isolated, home or away. These are questions that I certainly don't know the answer to. I'm not sure that many people know the answer to, and I think that's the worrying thing, is that I'm not sure Eddie Howe knows the answer to them. So long term, this has to be a blueprint, but I'm not convinced the team. I think what they're sort of still maintain they're caught between 2 things. They're caught between intensity as our identity and becoming possession based, and they sort of were able to lean into a bit of both yesterday, and it worked. But previously, they've sort of been lost between the 2 of them. And if you look at, that's why I said about Liverpool's so much credit goes to Arne Slot for the work he's done at Liverpool so far, because he's taken Jurgen Klopp's intensity as our identity, high pressing, whatever you want to call it, through into possession based, dominating the ball, dominating possession, not extending yourself too much and coasting through games. Yes, the Forest game's an exception, but generally there's been no issues with that at all. I mean, they went to Milan and won, managing the game really well, and I think Arne Slot's done a really, really good job so far, and I think that's what Newcastle need to look at, getting through that transition. Why is Arne Slot? I mean, yes, Liverpool's squad is obviously better than Newcastle's, and probably more fresh, because obviously they had their regeneration last season before Klopp left. But why is it that Arne Slot has been able to come in and take Liverpool from A to B straight away when Eddie Howe struggled to do either over the last 2 years? Dex says there's also mental burnout and an emotionally intense 2 years. The whole city's been on a ride. Maybe the players feel mentally burnt out. Possibly. I mean, there are a lot of these things. I think that's a good point, actually. There are a lot of these things. I've said this previously, that there are a lot of these sort of things like the Newcastle have extended themselves so much over the last couple of years, gone above and beyond, at a point where there was no expectation. Suddenly that's created expectation, and there was loads of momentum at that time. Now there's no momentum coming off a difficult summer, but the expectation is here, and that's a different challenge. And there was always going to be a point, whether it was that they underperformed against their own their current metric, which is probably top 5, top 6 now. They finished 7th. That's under it, which is what happened last year, even though lots of people see that as a positive season because they had so many issues. Or like it becomes win or bust, win or nothing. Like the expectation gets that high. There was always going to be a point, and it was always going to come when Newcastle were no longer were not able to match the demand on them, because either from the fans or from externally, because they'd done so well. And it was never like the great thing about 2 seasons ago, as I've said previously, was they were able to enjoy the ride. It was a team that had a load of quality in it. It was a perfectly built team, stylistically, tactically, but there was no pressure on it. So it was just enjoy the ride, see where this goes. Now that's no longer the case. And if you add into what Dexter said about emotional burnout, that could be a really good observation, a really interesting factor. And yeah, there's a sense, I think, that there's definitely something there, isn't there? And I think that everybody probably needs to. It was always going to happen. Everybody needs to stick by. I think actually it's been made worse by PSR because how you would normally deal with that is you would just refresh the team and go forward a bit more, and they've not been able to do that. So players who are older, and it's felt a little bit samey and a little bit static and stale at times. All of this is coming into it. And I think maybe that the team probably deserves a little bit of a maybe a little bit of cutting some slack in that sense, because it was always going to be difficult. Sai says maybe the fresh voice at Liverpool is why they're succeeding. Maybe Howe's becoming a little bit stale. I'll throw that to the chat. But do you agree with Sai? I definitely think that there's a feeling about Eddie Howe that isn't. That I remember doing last Christmas. I did a video Q&A, and loads of people asking me about Eddie Howe's future at the time, because it was in the middle of that December run when they were really poor. They'd gone out of the Champions League. There was a feeling that they were. It wasn't just a blip at that point. It was like they were consistently falling under the levels that they'd set the previous season. So lots of people were questioning whether Eddie Howe, not necessarily calling for it, but there was a load of support from people generally saying that Eddie Howe shouldn't go. He's going to, everybody, all the journalists, all the fans, all the players, everybody. It felt like everyone was like, Eddie Howe, like getting rid of Eddie Howe would be ridiculous. Now, I'm not saying that people are saying it should change, but I think Eddie Howe doesn't have that level of support anymore amongst people. I don't think, and I don't. The board aren't looking to get rid of him or anything like that, but it was telling what happened during the summer. I think that obviously there's an internal struggle, and it feels like something in the air might change at some point if this continues in that sense. But that's just, again, I stress that's my take on it. That's my view on it. That's not anything that I know, and that's not anything that that anybody should take as gospel. Dexter says players also switch off after a few years under the same coach. So basically, what Dexter's just backing up what Sai was saying. They stop having an impact. That's what makes Pep so unique. Yes, but Pep also changes his changes. Pep and Ferguson also, as was mentioned, changed their assistant quite a lot. That was why actually Ferguson used to change. Like he had Brian Kidd early on, then Steve McLaren, then Carlos Queiroz, then Mike Phelan. Whereas like to put this idea that Eddie Howe's, because Eddie Howe's in training sessions are always really high level, and they're always really sort of early as well. He's very sort of in terms of his standards. That's why the press conference is always at 9 o'clock. That never used to be the case at Newcastle. It was always sort of like in the afternoon under Rafa and Bruce. He moved it to 9 o'clock because he wanted it done first so he could focus on the team at training early on, and they sometimes do double sessions as well. That can be, but the other thing is having Jason Tyndall. Sorry, it's early in the morning. Having Jason Tyndall in the dugout with him consistently, to the point where they're almost like a double act as a manager. That sort of and the same coaching staff as well, the same 6 people that go with him everywhere he goes. That's the opposite to what Guardiola. So Guardiola had Arteta, now he's got Juan Marlilo, he's had Tito Villanova at Barcelona, he had I can't remember who the guy who he had at Bayern was. He's had different people with him, and the same as Ferguson. So that's even when the manager's the same, the messages may be slightly different as well. Dexter says definitely needed a refresh this summer. I agree with Sai. We either need to back Howe with a new signings or bring in a new coach. Sounds brutal, but it's just the nature of evolution. Yeah, I think there's definitely a sense now, isn't there, that there's the next stage is they're ready for the next stage, whatever it is. Whether it's, and I think the idea that things are stale, and it's also not helped by the fact that because they didn't strengthen in certain areas, that the team is as weak in terms of what we all knew it needed. It needed a new right midfielder. It doesn't have recovery pace at the back. It needed that. The fact that those two things are still generally there, and that was evident against Fulham, particularly. It was also really evident against Wolves when Dan Burns chasing the guy who crosses the ball at Wolves as well. There's no sense of the team hasn't fixed its current issues, and then the sort of idea that things just aren't right, and it feels like something needs to give. But yeah, as I say, like regardless of whether you think Howe should go or not, what is definitely sure is that he doesn't seem to have the sort of like people were saying in that video, as I alluded to earlier, the Q&A video I did sort of nearly a year ago now. Oh, you can't get rid of Howe, it's ridiculous, and that's not quite the same anymore, is it? Man City, the Man City case may help the rebuild if it relaxes PSR, if only slightly. Possibly. We'll see where that goes as well. For Howe to become elite, he needs to drop Tyndall and bring in new ideas. Yeah, I don't know about that necessarily, but and I don't think he ever would. I think they are as close as you can get in terms of being a managerial double act these days. But that's why Guardiola and that's why Ferguson were able to last so long. And why actually, people like Wenger, for example, as great as Wenger was, Arsenal fans were bored of him and said that it was stale and needed changing for a good 8 years or 6-7 years before it actually happened. And he only had Pat Rice with him, so maybe there is a case for this as well. That that's the difference, and as I say, the same voice, the same intensity levels, burnout and needing something refreshing. I think there is a point where something has to give in that sense, and whether it's now or whether it's Eddie Howe or something, then who knows? But are there any more final thoughts on the game yesterday and where you think it'll go? What, as I say, I've left the Joe Linton question because that's going to be just a little insight into people who join me on these lives. That's going to be the topic for the analysis, looking at Joe Linton specifically and how he fits into the team, because he's not great in possession. I think it was evidence. Maybe Mike Tyndall's the answer. It's too early to be doing this. This is why I usually do them at 5 o'clock. That's my cruising altitude. I only got up at 9. Mike Tyndall. Oh Jesus. Yeah. So back on Monday to look at the game in more detail. Looking at, as I say, this is generally how I'm going to do it. Where I'll do a general reaction with you guys. Also, while you're here, just out of interest, I'm noticing. I only need to, if I'm noticing a couple of things with the way that the channel's going. Obviously, naturally, the transfer videos I did in the summer, they were always going to get consistently better views because everyone loves transfer stuff. But the preview doesn't get as many views. I only got, I got very. It was a. The last preview performed particularly under the level of normal. But what is it about? Any suggestions on what I could do for the preview to make it more, to make it people click on it more, or generally in terms of how to keep the views, increase the views, increase increase the interest in the channel. Because I've noticed a couple of things with the lives do well. Like I get a decent interaction with lots of people. Obviously, the timing of them isn't ideal. Like the Southampton one I did at 5 o'clock on the Saturday, people just jumped straight on. Naturally, I can understand that, but I'm sort of trying to understand why certain videos are performing better than others. And if you have any suggestions, please drop them in the live chat in the next couple of minutes before we wrap up. But as I say, no worries if not. But yeah, it just feels like I'm trying to understand how to grow this. What you guys want, and I have quite an interest, as I say, in doing some other. Not as I said previously, I'll never do less Newcastle stuff. There'll always be this Newcastle, the preview, the lives, the tactical analysis. That'll always be there. But I might do some more bonus stuff as well. Previews with opposition fans are always more interesting. Okay, that's that's a really good point. That's a really good point, actually. Cheers, Dexter. I'll take that on board and go forward with that. I think I did have an idea it's probably a little bit too tight, but I was going to try and see if Warren Barton had joined for a pre Wimbledon video for his because of his connections. But I think thanks for that, Dex. It's a really good point, which I'll take forward. And yeah, other than that, I think we're probably about to wrap up. But please do, as I say, drop any comments below. If you're watching this back, please continue to comment. I'll definitely get Warren onto the channel at some point. Whether it's probably a bit too late for the Wimbledon thing, but Warren is always really kind with me and very always willing to talk. He's really he's a great guy. So I'll definitely get Warren. Will definitely be a guest on the channel at some point. And I think guests generally, I did one with Chris Woff, who's a friend of mine in the Athletic in the summer. He was great. And there's not much competition for intelligent, balanced banter on you. So you can corner the market, says Dexter. Thank you. I appreciate that. I never want, the thing is, I look at these people and look at a lot of these fan channels and stuff. And I'm a fan, but I'm also a journalist as well. So I try and sort of combine the two things. But I never want to be one of these fan channels, even if it means that I don't get hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views, who just rants and tries to create things. But I'll try. So I'm looking at, as I say, try to do other things, maybe some other, things on other things, not football as well. But you'll never get non-Newcastle as well, not non-football. But you'll always get the weekend reaction from me and the preview. I really appreciate that, Dexter, on the comment on getting opposition fans involved, because I think it does really help, and it gives an insight into how it'll work. And I think that's a good thing that I'll try and implement in the next few weeks. Anyway, other than that, Thanks so much for joining me, guys. I'll see you on Monday for the tactical analysis, and then I'm not sure I'll do. As I say, it's a bit of a tight turnaround to do a preview of the Wimbledon game, but I'll definitely do another live reaction where we can talk through the game as well. Opposition journalist is a great idea, Si. Really gives the sort of the balance, doesn't it? I guess. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you for the tactical analysis on Monday. Cheers.